So yeah, thanks for showing up. This talk is a meditation. It's not advice at all. And so many times you come to these conferences and people tell you how to do things. I promise you, I'm not going to tell you how to do anything at all in this talk. This will will not make you better at your work, but it's a talk about being connected to the things that we create, about kind of seeing the beauty and the impact and the humans through our work. I'm going to talk about some things in this talk that might be either really alien to you or simply not how you interact with programming as a thing. And you know what? If it doesn't connect with how you interact with the work, that's totally cool. Like, I don't see the world how everybody else does, and I don't mind if people have a different perspective on things. So like, it's neither a compliment nor a criticism. I also apologize for my very husky voice. I've been ill all week, so if I seem like I'm dying on stage, that's why. So I just kind of want to ruminate on how some of the work that we do makes me feel when I inspect it from like a really particular perspective. All right, hands up. Anyone know what this is? Nobody. Wow, there's normally at least one. Perfect. So this is a photo of a very, very famous piece of installation art. It's called My Bed by Turner-nominated artist Tracey Emin. So Emin conceived of this piece in 1998 after going through a particularly messy breakup. And the piece contained crumpled tissues, period-stained underwear, cigarettes, vodka bottles, a pregnancy test, lube, and condoms. And as she emerged from this kind of misery of the breakup, she turned the scene into this really stark, introspective, autobiographical piece. Now, in her own words, Emin said, this is a direct quote from The Guardian, "Well, I spent 4 days in bed and I was feeling at a very, very low ebb. And for 2 of those 4 days, I was asleep and I didn't wake up. It was about the breakup of a relationship with someone I was really very in love with. And it was also about my own sort of desperation. It was a very romantic love in a lot of ways. It was like this 19th century bohemian, have you ever half lived moment. I'm very romantic, and what I was feeling was the saddest kind of romanticism that anybody could ever imagine. I could have written a broken-hearted love story, and at the same time, I think I did with the bed." So, The Guardian journalist Adrian Searle wrote that the piece was an endlessly solipsistic, self-regarding homage to an artist that he called a bore, which I think is the most Guardian think piece way of like shit-talking somebody in the entire world. Basically, he just said she was egocentric and it was rubbish. The stark contrast but the stark connection even to like this raw, relatable human emotion in a time before mental health was at the forefront of public consciousness was not only this kind of stark display of vulnerability, but also like this overtly honest one from a woman connected with an audience, making Emin, who was ultimately at the time like a struggling, really common artist, a very poor person. And she was part of this like emerging 1980s young British art scene. It made her a household name. Like, this was a very, very famous piece. So My Bed was last sold in 2015 for £2.54 million. So I guess fuck that one Guardian journalist, right? Like, joke's on him. So despite all of this, though, I've often heard of this bed used as the poster child example of why modern art sucks, or why people don't understand modern art, because it's just like a shitty bed. Anyone could have made that, right? But they didn't. And often people will say that it can't be art because it isn't somehow beautiful, right? And I'm not talking about My Bed here from like some deep love for the piece. I think it's okay. But I think it's worth celebrating as something that did precisely what it set out to do. It precisely was successful as art. Now, fast forward to 2026, so we're in this really funny place in the world, right, where the kind of person that would look at Tracey Emin's bed and say, "Oh, I really don't get art," will be perfectly content posting a bunch of low-rent AI slop at the top of their blog posts complaining about the proliferation of AI. Make it make sense. It's kind of funny to me. And it kind of struck me over the last couple of years as kind of diffusion model generated images have become increasingly popular, that it's forced a lot of technical people to contend with art for the first time. Now, I don't mean like technical people have never seen a work of art before. But what I do mean is that a lot of technical people come from a background that's distinctly not grounded in humanities subjects, right? And if you watch with, the air quotes discourse around the current state of AI models that can produce pretty high fidelity works, you'll kind of see art people everywhere bemoaning that like, oh, this thing isn't art, right? It's obviously not art. And, computers can never make art. And then a whole different audience looking at the same things, feeling really lost because in their eyes, it all kind of looks fine, kind of fine. So I love the term AI slop, right? But it's also undergone this really significant semantic drift in the year since it was coined, a year or two maybe now. And a lot of the language associated with AI goes through this semantic drift. Like vibe coding doesn't mean now what it meant when the guy that coined it. But Business Insider wrote in 2024 about how AI slop was meant to characterize, and I have to read this because it's very funny, the shrimp Jesus kind of slop. Bizarre, obviously fake, and sometimes vaguely unsettling in a trypophobia-triggering way. Common themes involving old people holding birthday cake, asking you to wish them a happy birthday. Babies doing things that babies shouldn't do. Snakes eating buses. Bikes or other vehicles overloaded with hundreds of babies or some other strange cargo. Soldiers with prosthetic legs. Women with missing limbs and huge busts, and Jesus. These images are often sort of eerily exploitative. Right? I thought that was a great description of this guy. But as the ire with AI kind of rises, and people are using slop to basically mean anything, regardless of its fidelity, right, that comes from a model. Okay, anyone in the room? If I said, what is art? Hands up if you think you could give me like a one-sentence answer. I'm interested. Something that moves you. Not bad. Not bad. So I have a pretty simple definition. Oh, please. Anything and everything. Okay, so here's my definition. Again, not necessarily correct, but this is how I feel. Art is the work that's left behind. Right, it's the work left behind when the artist contends with the human condition in some way. It's the way they can affect change in the world. It's the residue, it's the work. And there's a lot of room in that definition, right, deliberately. There's a lot of room on purpose because it leaves room for many of the big contradictions to sit inside of it. It's why Tracy Emin's bed is art. She was transferring something that she felt deeply in a work. It's why some books have artistic merit, while others are just pulpy entertainment. It's not a value judgment. It's not trying to intrinsically elevate art as being more than. It's just a categorization. It's why a mundane vase can be beautiful, yet banal, and why art can be ugly and unpleasant and violent. Art doesn't have to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be pleasing. And it often has something to say, but sometimes it can just be about evoking a feeling. Now, the truth is not everything said is worth hearing, right? Like it doesn't make everything valuable. And this is really all just kind of first-year art student stuff, right? But to the people that have never studied art at all, it's why it's often really a confounding topic and people kind of just give up with platitudes like, oh, I don't know art, but I know what I like. It's like, well, fine. But it's the reason why the films of Martin Scorsese are art and the Marvel Cinematic Universe is entertainment, right? Fine. So the answer is no, a computer can't make art, right? Because a computer has nothing to say about the human experience. It's ridiculous. A housefly can't make art either. But a human can obviously use a computer or anything really to make art if they're coming from a place where they're trying to communicate something about the human experience. So what does this have to do with programming? So I really don't think anybody understands programming. I don't mean people in this room. I mean, well, one would hope. But I've spent most of my career feeling kind of invisible. And I appreciate the irony of standing on a stage in a conference and saying I'm invisible. And I don't mean me personally, I mean kind of we personally. I just feel like we're all invisible, right? People don't understand the work that technical people do as a general rule. Like you go ask someone on the street and they'll say, "Oh, is it something about ones and zeros?" And you're like, "Sure, sure, let's go with that." It's long been difficult for people to reckon with programming because they can't point at it. They can't tap the sign. And it's really strange to feel invisible despite the whole world basically engaging in a hype cycle about the thing that you do every day, every 4 years since about 1980, right? Like software is the conversation. And I remember this point really hitting home in 2015, right? I wrote my first book, Don't Be Too Impressed. My first book is a kid's book about programming for ages 8 to 12. Bestseller, but like it's not hard when for ages 8 to 12. And I will never forget how excited my mother was when I gave her a copy of the book. Because despite her like constant encouragement, despite her lack of knowledge about what I did, she always was like, "Hey, yeah, go do the computer thing that you love." Like, sure. What I saw when she held that book for the very first time was that she finally understood my work. She could hold it, she could touch the sign, and she was so proud of this thing that I had made. And to me, it was like this brutally bittersweet moment because I just remember thinking of all the fucking cool things I've done in my career. It's the picture book. It's the picture book. It's the picture book that got you. Oh, dear Lord. I love my mother. She's amazing. But I can't blame her, right? I can't blame her. But it made me understand that I wasn't invisible. And thinking about this, really, I was just craving to be seen in the work. Like the sadness came from me wanting to be seen and understood for the things that I actually did. And so in recent years, I've taken to thinking about the code that I write as art, which sounds very pretentious, but it's my works. I used to paint, and if I continued painting, I would have a body of work. But it's the way that I contend with and affect change in the world. It's how I process my feelings. It's a form of expression that I use. And I don't say that to give it a sense of elevated importance, but I just want to capture what doing that work means to me. And I appreciate in 2026 when like what it is to be a programmer feels like it's under relentless attack from kind of state-of-the-art models and people saying they can just automate us out of this work. But a lot of the work that I do comes from a place that's important to me for some reason or another. I am driven, often out of pure love or pure hate or spite or something. I'm driven to do the work. And I know I'm not the only one that feels this way because I see it everywhere. So over the past decade, I've had this kind of pipe dream of trying to solve this problem. I've wanted to put together like a traditional art gallery style installation that takes code that I think is either culturally important to software, intrinsically beautiful, or like aesthetic as software, or change the world in some way, and commission artists to help contextualize the impact of the thing that it actually did to the world. The idea is just to help people understand what software is by presenting the work itself, like the actual code or as close to a replica of it as possible, alongside just a work that expresses its value, right? I've always imagined it as there's a place called Somerset House in London. It's on like the bank of the Thames, very like traditional art gallery, like a Somerset House kind of exhibition, probably as a reaction to the fact that every year I go to an art gallery show, they're always like, "Oh, code as art or technical art." And it's clearly a bunch of like first-year art students that have never like actually written any code, making up some like nonsense stuff. And like, I kind of feel like this has to come from technical culture to be like an authentic reflection of our culture. And I've especially wanted to do this with code that has like a noteworthy human characteristic in the work, something where I can really see the extreme care or humanity in it. Now, I'm sure Royal Festival Hall will eventually come knocking if I just do this talk enough, right? But I want to talk about some of the ways I see you all in your work. And I want to start by talking about rocket ships. So, lots of people have tried to be seen in their work in different ways before. And for a long time, this was one of my favorite examples. So in putting this talk together, this example has gone through like an extreme semantic drift. So the Apollo space missions were software projects, because of course they were, and the code that was written as part of them has been archived and stored by the MIT Museum. So they open sourced, source available the original programs. And I remember when this code was first widely circulated, or at least when I first saw it around a decade ago, I was reading the assembly listings for the program Colossus. Now, Colossus is the software that ran on the AGC. The AGC is the Apollo Guidance Computer. Now, my favorite thing about it at the time was the launch routine of the Colossus program. The file was called Burn Baby Burn. And I remember thinking that it was funny and like a really lovely human touch that I could just imagine like seeing someone typing away and Disco Inferno's playing in the background, and they're like a nice little captured moment, right? It's also fascinating, as an aside, that this one project, which was led by Margaret Hamilton, pictured here, is often cited as one of the most important early woman-led programming projects. A lot of interesting firsts in this. Now, I've told lots of people this story about how it's kind of cute that like there's a Disco Inferno joke in the Apollo Guidance Computer. Anyone know when Apollo 11 launched? 1969. Disco Inferno didn't chart until 1976. Huh, interesting. So I went digging. So attached to the source code listings of the shared assembly code, there's a note, and it says this. At the get-together of the AGC developers celebrating the 40th anniversary of the first moonwalk, Don Isles, one of the authors of this routine, along with Peter Adler, has related to us a little interesting history behind the naming of the routine. Well, it traces back to 1965 and the Los Angeles riots. It was inspired by disc jockey extraordinaire and radio station owner Magnificent Montague. Magnificent Montague used the phrase, "Burn, baby, burn," when spinning the hottest new records. Magnificent Montague was the charismatic voice of soul music in Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles from the mid-1950s to the mid-1960s. Burn, baby, burn, master ignition routine. So, curiously, Adler, the other guy, told this story differently. So he attributed it to someone called H. Rap Brown, who was a key voice in the Black Panthers movement. And what he said was this: "We might not have been out on the streets, but we did listen to the news, and the two biggest news stories were Vietnam and Black Power, the latter including H. Rap Brown and his exhortations to burn, baby, burn." This was 1967, after all, developer Peter Adler wrote in the Apollo Journal. H. Rap Brown was arrested for murder in the year 2000, almost a decade before the subtle retelling of this story, which might explain the retconning of the reason behind the name. Whilst it's true that Montague appears to have originated the phrase, it was popularized by a black poet, Marvin X, in his poem with the same name. There's some unpleasant language in this. I'm not going to censor it very heavily because I think that's inappropriate, but the poem goes like this. Burn, baby, burn. Tired, sick and tired, tired of being sick and tired, lost in the wilderness of white America. Are the masses asses? Cool, said the master to the slave. No problem, don't rob and steal, I'll be your driving wheel. Cool. And he wheeled us into 350 years of black madness, to hog guts and conked hair and cowardice, to bleaching cream and Uncle Thomas, to Watts, to the streets, to the kill. Boom, 2 honkies gone. Motherfuck the police. Parker sisters too. Black people. Tired. Sick and tired. Tired of being sick and tired. Burn, baby, burn. Don't leave them boss rags. Come on, child, don't mind the tags. Get all that motherfucking pluck. Get them guns too, we don't give a fuck. Burn, baby, burn. Cook out of sight. Feinberg's white front, Weinberg's black front. Burn, baby, burn. In time, he will learn. We probably won't ever know if the naming here was a joke, political support, or cultural appropriation, but it certainly is both human and almost by definition art in the way that it captured its cultural context. Oof. So the fascinating thing about hearing that story was about how it captured either intentionally or unintentionally the social context surrounding the software that was built, right? And it kind of got me thinking about some of my own trite examples and apologies, like the social context that we encode into the software that we write for ourselves and other people. So this is my favorite comment of all time that I was personally involved in writing. And I love it because it captures three very distinct personalities, four people, a particular point in time. And I like it enough that it's in my Photos app 15 years later. So there's a story underneath it of like a particularly complicated, horrible critical path. It was literally like the take money, take a payment thing in a charity system. And to nobody's surprise, it had grown into this disgusting, like 1,200 line monstrosity of like conditionals and God knows what. So my friend Rob got there first, tone of voice completely intact as RC, followed by, I believe, a contractor that was working with us at the time called Ben, who was former military and very perfunctory, just like refactor too long, like cool, zero personality. Followed by my inner monologue being very, very long-term, consistent, couldn't resist getting involved. Once I saw two comments, I had to add a third. And then finally, John with his sardonic wit. This guy used to role play as opposing political factions on news articles just to wind people up. He was very, I love this guy, he's amazing. And while this isn't art, it's like a cultural artifact that makes me feel nostalgia, despite the fact it's just some random throwaway junk software, right? I think this is kind of like tagging. Like tagging's kind of art, in the same way that graffiti in the real world can be anything from a tag to a piece. The intent is the same. I should probably get this on a t-shirt at some point. And the more I think about this stuff, as solipsistic as I am, I start thinking about my own personal tropes. So I frequently apologize to a fictionalized version of my mother when I'm doing horrible things in software. I did a search to my GitHub and there's like 80 occurrences of me writing, sorry, mum. Or occasionally just to the programmers of the future and probably myself when I know I'm just giving up. Like there's a moment of just like, oh, fuck it. They're all me encoding the reality of doing this kind of work and kind of the wry humor of how I feel about it in the moment into the body of the text itself. I am in all my work. I know I am. And every programmer, as they develop their own style, they put themselves in their work and you learn to see it when you learn the people well enough. I don't think there's anything wrong with having your own tropes. It comes with technique, right? I've occasionally joked at work that you could replace me by a cheap robot that just says, have we tried looking at this through a different lens? Or can we just pull on that thread? Actually, I said that recently to some of the people that work for me, and one of my guys was like, no, David, that's not what you say. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, no, you always say my mental model is this. And now every fucking time I catch myself saying my mental model is, someone says, do a shot. And it's like 10 times a day, I swear to God. We probably all become our own parody eventually. I think we're doomed to it. So over the years, there's been like a huge amount of, I don't know, self-portraits, I guess, in the software and systems that people build. I thought it'd be interesting to look at some of the more niche examples of this kind of self-identification. So first we have like silicon chip art or chip graffiti. I love this stuff, like really tiny artworks that are embedded on integrated circuits. So these are often kind of pinhead sized and printed with lithography. I think that's how you pronounce that word. So this technique was originally used as a kind of pseudo copy protection because copies of the work went unnoticed to human eyes, but if they got a microphone, magnifying glass, microscope, yes, that thing, and looked at it, you could see the artwork, so it acted as proof that the circuit had been copied. So whilst this was kind of a legitimized form of signing to detect counterfeits, it became popular as all the people that designed the chips wanted to sign their work with something they liked. So designers started including contraband artwork on chips. Especially like this design by an engineer called Yukhai Shark Muk, who put a photo of himself and his new wife, Ellen, onto the Silicon Graphics MIPS R10000 microprocessor in 1996. Like, that was in the same family of chips that Mario 64 was written for. Like, I love that. The most literal interpretation of putting yourself in the work. And this bust of Marvel's Thor, which is almost a millimeter square. So graphics designer April Comer did the portrait for the Hewlett-Packard chip, and Darren Miller turned it into a bitmap that was encoded onto the silicon itself. So detailed. And if we zoom out to more human-readable dimensions, signing printed circuit boards is like a relatively common practice, with designers signing and making jokes and using memes and other kind of cultural references, and generally kind of personalizing the systems that they design. I guess hardware designers really do have the most fun. This is my favorite because I love music. I have no idea who actually did it, but I believe it's from the Boomerang range of looper pedals, according to a little bit of internet sleuthing. But I can absolutely see the human in the work writing that, right? Just both to make them feel good and amused by the momentary delight it might cause someone who's ripping apart his effects pedal. And to me, that's honestly one of the best feelings in the entire world, right? Seeing something so wonderfully executed, asynchronous from the author of the work, where despite this kind of temporal decoupling, for a second, you can imagine exactly what they were thinking when they did the thing. And it's funny, actually, because anyone played Red Dead Redemption 2, the video game? The first time I had this feeling, I remember it so vividly. I was sitting with a friend on my couch, and as the second act of Red Dead Redemption 2 starts, it's a cowboys and Indians game, muddy cowboy cart rolling through the mud, it's raining. And I remember playing it and sitting and turning to my friend at the time saying, "Did you fucking see that?" And he's like, "What? We're going into town?" I'm like, No. It rained, and then the rain ran into the divot in the mud that cart made. I see you, anonymous programmer at Rockstar Games who spent 9 months making that work. That tiny, tiny, tiny little detail in the simulation. Just beautifully executed, exceptional work. And I'd like to think that I gave the anonymous person the recognition they deserved for it in that moment. So finding a way to claim authorship and creative agency over a work isn't just something that came from the hardware scene. It kind of happened in games in the 70s as well. So in 1979, the seminal game literally called Adventure came out on the Atari. And at the time, Atari didn't allow programmers to have credits in their work at all. So this led to what was probably the very first Easter egg in a video game, where you have to do the following to see the name of the program. And I have to read this, I'm afraid. So you have to select Game 2 or Game 3. Get the bridge. Find the maze north of the Black Castle. Look for the room that's flickering. The flicker is due to an extra hidden item in the room that's related to the Easter egg. In the flickering maze, use the bridge to get access to the chamber in the bottom/middle of the room. Go to the lower right corner of the small chamber and you will pick up one single pixel. Carry the pixel to the room just above the catacombs, located exactly one screen down and one screen right from the yellow castle. Don't worry, the pixel will be completely invisible unless you rub along the southern border of the game screen. Drop the pixel, invisible, in this room with a barrier on the right-hand side. Retrieve 3 more objects, the key, the sword, and the chalice, and drop them all in the room. Once there are 4 objects in the room, including the pixel, you can walk through the rightmost wall to view the Easter egg. And that's how the guy got his name in the game. I've never heard of someone so paranoid about being fired that was how he did it. And there's also this really strong through line from early microcomputing and the computer culture that led to circuit and chip signatures and kind of modern generative art. Now, despite the reputation of programmers for being kind of cold, stoic, analytical people, early hacker culture and the demo scene especially was awash with creative programming. Now, if you've not heard of the demo scene before, it grew from the underground computing clubs and early bulletin board scenes of the 1980s and 90s, like the Wares scene, the original kind of piracy scene. Now, various teams competed in invisible competitions and sometimes real-time events to produce creative, genre-pushing graphics programming. often in super constrained microcomputing environments. Well, I'm not sure if the people of the time would have identified what they were doing as art. It absolutely is art. And in both kind of the literal sense, in that it made kind of pretty pictures, but also in the cultural sense, in that they were using their shared love of competitive programming to build up like a hacker culture and had a shared set of experiences that they were really producing works about, right? The art may well have been implicit, but the kinds of genre-pushing graphics that they produced not only survive today, but actually some of the world's most famous game studios came from this culture. So like Remedy Entertainment started off as a demo scene group, and they're still making blockbuster games today. Now, interestingly, the demo scene also gave way to crack intros. These are a bit busy, so I'll just kind of skip through a few of them so you can see them. And they're all these kind of pretty things, right? So they're like an artifact of early video game ripping groups, leaving their virtual fingerprints behind as they raced to the first crack, and it was like a competitive scene at the time. Now, the demo scene and crack-tros are probably the most conspicuous leftovers from the microcomputing era of hacker culture, and they're works made to both look good and capture culture, right? And I honestly think that kind of race to crack games and produce trainers and crack-tros is probably as worthy of preservation as the video games that they were hacking and exploiting at the time. Like, they're both valuable works, and they're kind of part of our history as programmers, I think. Now, past all the obvious avenues where computer art is explored, like Hollywood CG and digital paintings and things like that, where the work is front and center, there's still this kind of rich culture of generative and procedural art that's fundamentally coming from this creative space that's alive in technical culture today. Now, my friend Elena recently shared some work she's been doing with me that deliberately bridges these two disciplines. So she writes software to help drive machines that deliberately try and create mixed media artworks. And there's something gloriously human about mixing the two things together to me. I want to take a little look about her process here. This is really cool. Like, I love this. So Elena is a really excellent engineer. She's a speaker. You might see her at a conference. I keep on rattling her chain to come and do a talk about this absolutely amazing, really, really cool process that she's kind of dreamt up. So if you see that appear on a conference schedule, please go check it out. I think it's really, really awesome work. And I put it in the talk just to kind of peer pressure. Right? Okay, so while the code that generates art is intrinsically interesting, I don't think it comes from the same place I was in when I was contemplating how people don't understand programming, right? Like how people don't understand what we really do. And the thing about programs that create art is that the output is more traditional art in form, right? It's the output, that's the thing that people see, not really the software itself. So, I think most programmers develop taste, and they start to understand what software they find inherently pleasing. Now, I'm not sure that everyone would always be able to articulate what they thought good looked like in words, but my suspicion is that it's always related to a bunch of kind of ingrained cultural norms that grow around programming languages specifically, right? Now, I do think there's a kind of shared mental model, take a shot, that emerges when you kind of focus on the aesthetic quality of code and how you can use it to design and telegraph intent, right? Like, fashion changes, but good design is evergreen. So I want to look at an example here to kind of bring this to life about how taste is cultural. So the reason that the sample on the left looks good to C# developers and the one on the right looks good to JavaScript developers, there is no functional benefit or advantage or inherent disadvantage to either of these things, right? Brace style and the eternal debate around it are just cultural norms encoded in the formatting of code. It's taste, and it's an example that everybody uses because everybody encounters this very specific example. And obviously, they're all wrong, right? Because we know this is the one true brace style. Obviously. You have no idea how hard it is to stop an auto formatter completely fucking with that example when you try and type it. But this is dissonance, right? It's deliberately dissonant. Not in the same way as sound is dissonant, but it comes from the same place. Like, if you opened a code base that followed this one true brace style, you would feel the dissonance in your bones, right? You would know that something was deeply, deeply wrong about the situation that you found yourself in. So it's deliberately subverting norms to make you feel discomfort, right? You could probably build software that was literally intended to be art as observed by a programmer by using dissonant formatting and clearly dangerous at runtime data structures. And you could do that to communicate a message, right? You could make it art. You could definitely write a program that could intrinsically be art. Though I suspect, and here's the weird thing, if you showed this to a non-programmer, they wouldn't feel the dissonance. They wouldn't even understand why that's bad, right? Okay, but there's an idea here. We're going to get really weird. There's an idea here. If art is an artist contending with the human experience, can I make a form of my code? Can I make the form of my code share something about my experience deliberately? Or write code where it is literally a commentary on the way that someone literate in the medium might understand the message? Let's give it a go. Okay, I'll tell you what it is. So this is a HTTP server written in x86 assembly, and yes, it does work. And in this case, obviously an AI model, after several attempts and about 30 minutes of debugging, got this working. Now this is useless code. It's simultaneously useless code. It's a thing that does not need to exist. But it's also something I thought about when I wondered how I could describe the overabundance of technology that's often applied to simple things. And like the mechanical waste in a lot of our software designs. I'm using effectively an anachronistic form, assembly language, to something that often goes over-designed and over-applied to say, like, this is what you could have. This is how simple this could be. Though it does make me wonder, like, even if I know what I'm trying to say here, if it's completely impenetrable by all the deepest expert in order to interpret or extract meaning from it, is it really valuable? Like, is it worthwhile to do this kind of art? Perhaps I could turn it into valuable work, but I'm not sure this example is it either. And okay, so this thread got me thinking about a lot of the code I see in like hashtag enterprise systems, and how like utterly careless, mundane, messy, and basically shite most of the code that people peddle through is, right? It's true, we all know it. I have this whole other talk about how the slavish dedication to software design is like the only salve that we have for the general unpleasantness of so much of the rote enterprise, like trash code that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. But it makes me wonder, if we can celebrate the beauty, both inherent and implicit, and explicit and authored in a code base, could we use the careless mess as some kind of commentary on the state of like untended to systems, right? The carelessness of much enterprise code really kind of tells on itself. But I'd be fascinated in taking some of the worst pockets of code in like a large enterprise system and perhaps visualizing them against like the stock market prices of the company that owns the software, or the yearly profits of the enterprises that are actively neglecting their software so readily, right? I think you can make a meaningful artistic statement about the state of software development with a work literally constructed from the code itself, contextualized with real-world impact. There's lots of ideas of how this could work, right? Like snippets of the Twitter source code set against election interference. Beautiful shadows rendered by Carmack's Reverse, the Doom 3 3D stenciling engine. Beautiful things, ugly things, all framed by their impact. And despite the obvious misgivings I have to contend with about like the corporate excess of some of our industry, this line of thought also reminds me of one of the most flattering things that someone ever said to me in my job. Now, about a decade ago, I was helping a team, and they were struggling with some flaky, horrible kind of batch processing job. And the whole thing was about 700-800 lines of like spaghetti copy pasta code, right? And one of the things that I'm good at as like a jobbing programmer is just quietly sitting with the work. I don't know if anybody else has this kind of same process. Like I sit with the work and I push it around, like I rework it, I undo it, I rework it, I undo it, and like I find the shape. And I find the shape where it feels right. And like I love that process. It's like really, I don't know, meditative for me personally. I like doing it late at night. And I took this program home and I poured myself a drink and I put some music on. It's very, very romantic. I was just pushing the code around. And I found its shape, right? And the answer wasn't a revelation to me. It was a declarative, like deferred execution pipeline style thing where each of the processing steps was like really easy to sight read. It's a gentle art, right? Pushing syntax around. And pipeline style things are really easy to do this with. Just split things up into steps with callbacks and like whatever. We've all been there. Anyway, so I checked this thing in. And with like I was probably drunk, like a pretty mundane Git commit of like, ha 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 ha, ha, fixed it. Like, and the next morning, the nearshore team comes online, and I get this like gushing message from the lead. I've only been working with these people for like 3 weeks, and they're just like, "Oh my God, this is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," because they've been struggling with this for like 3 years, and it was like the bane of their existence. And I think it really gets to the heart of like what this obsessive aesthetic sensibility gets when you apply it to the software that you really care about. Like, I took the time to make something look beautiful because it telegraphed intent. The code itself was beautiful because it captured the flow of execution. It was inherently, in a way that is only possible in code, elegant. Like it was something of programming that can't exist in another form. And this other guy who I've met like a week earlier, he saw that immediately, and he had the moment I had with the guy that wrote the rendering engine at Rockstar Games. You're like, oh, I see you. I see what you did. I thank you. And he told me. And you know what? Just some shitty line of business app, right? But it was my work. And maybe it was art. It certainly captured how I felt about it at the time. So if we can see the ugliness personified in work, in tyrannical software that does harm, right? I think we should just as readily celebrate the inherent beauty in code written with kind of love and care and intentionality. Like I often have this throwaway joke that like you should write error messages like you're in love with the person that's gonna see them, and like I believe it to my bones. I actually went searching for the code sample. It's lost to time. Probably wasn't even that good. So as we finish, I want to play one of my favorite clips from the late, great David Bowie, the better David, who knew a thing or two about what it takes to make great works. Whenever I am thinking about what I want to do or where I want to go next in my career, this is always in my head.
Never play to the gallery, I think. But you never learn that until much later on, I think. But never work for other people at what you do. Always remember that the reason that you initially started working was that there was something inside yourself that you felt that if you could manifest it in some way, you would understand more about yourself and how you coexist with the rest of society. And I think it's terribly dangerous for an artist to fulfill other people's expectations. I think they generally produce their worst work when they do that. And the other thing I would say is that if you feel safe in the area that you're working in, you're not working in the right area. Always go a little further into the water than you feel you're capable of being in. Go a little bit out of your depth. And when you don't feel that your feet are quite touching the bottom, you're just about in the right place to do something exciting.
Wise man, the better David.
Never play to the gallery.
So, I'm coming back to that first question. Can AI, unfettered, make art? Well, what if I wanted to capture and mirror the technology that internalizes and mimics the labor of workers in a medium that does the exact same synthesis? Let's try a prompt. Make me a hellish, grotesque painting depicting the exploited workers of the Industrial Revolution being replaced by machinery, Dante's Inferno, workers subsumed into industry, organic matter, machines made from bodies, human forms incorporated into the machines. A bit meta and on the nose, but let's see where we go. Can I make something ugly using a blunt, unfiltered instrument which represents its method and its place in history? I think I can. This is like AI slop that is meant to be slop. And it's violent and ugly, and it's no good. Even though I used a tool to say a thing, it doesn't make the work good or valuable. There is nobody in this work. I hope this has been thought-provoking. I think I'm going to try and make that art exhibition, and I'm going to repeatedly say that. And every time this talk is recorded, to try and bully them into letting me do it. So thanks for listening. All my talks are about feeling less alone, I think. Thank you.